Welcome to Hello Darling Talk Show, where we introduce personal stories that will make you laugh, cry, and possibly change your life. Joining me today on Hello Darling is a man who cycled halfway across the world on a special mission. Jeremy Scott, known as the solo cyclist extraordinaire, cycled 52,000 kilometers across 29 countries over 2.5 years to raise funds and support for British, New Zealand and Australian heart foundations. Meet the inspiring man and hear about his adventure. Hello, darling.
Hello, darling.
Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It was a long road to Hello, darling, but you made it. Thank you so much.
It's taken a couple of years, but I'm here.
On May 25th, 2014, you stood in New Zealand at the end of your world trip, cycling world trip. When you accomplished it, how did it feel? What did you think when you arrived?
I cried like a baby. The moment I finished, just the euphoria of thinking, you've done it, you've just ridden around the world, and just you think back to how scared, insecure, alone you felt at the start, not thinking you could do it, to be 2.5 years later going, you've done it and you know you can do it. And just amazing feeling to be surrounded by family, friends, where a lot of the trip, it was solo, but I had their support. And just suddenly appreciating what that support meant to me, it was a very emotional day.
And you almost answered my next question I was planning to ask, and that was on a day of the 5th of October 2011, yes? That's where you started your trip.
That's right.
In the morning, when you woke up, when you were going to do it, what did you think? How did it feel?
I didn't want to get out of bed.
Wow.
I was just so scared. And like, it was one of those moments where the excuses just started to creep back in. Well, they were flooding back in.
Little bit late, huh?
Yes. But I started to tell myself, look, you haven't trained properly, you haven't prepared, you haven't done enough practice, you don't know what gear to take. So those excuses just started to flood back in. But I realised you've always got options. And I thought, just give it a go, see how things pan out. Like I knew I'd made excuses a lot of times in my life. And I thought, this isn't going to be one of those days. I'm going to try.
Jeremy, what made you decide to embark on this adventure? What was the beginning of it?
It all started when I was a baby, to be honest, where I was born with quite a major heart defect. And I had to undergo quite major heart surgery when I was 4 years old. And it was a procedure which my surgeon wasn't confident about. He wasn't sure I'd survive. But I did come out the other side, and as I grew up, I knew that surgery had given me a second shot at life, and I wanted to make the most of that chance. So I started to dream up all these different ideas, and it came down to the trigger was nothing more than a series of articles in a magazine about people who had completed little cycling journeys in different parts of the world. And the first thing that struck me about these articles was they didn't look like superheroes. And I thought, if they can do one trip, why can't they do 2 or 3? And then I'm starting to think, why can't I? And I was living in London when I was read these articles, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I thought, I need to get home one day. How am I going to get there? And suddenly it fell into place. I knew I'd found the challenge I'd craved, and I knew I was going to ride a bike home.
Wow. And you mentioned that you weren't preparing for it. So how was your cycling abilities? How was your cycling experience by the time you decided? Did you cycle a lot before? Did you train a lot?
When I came up with the idea, I didn't even own a bicycle. So it was definitely out of left field. But I eventually purchased a bike off a friend and started commuting to work 1 day a week, 2 days a week, as my fitness is improving. And then you start to realise if you do this day after day, you can cover distance. And I was at a stage a year earlier, so I was ready to set off in 2010. But I ruptured my anterior cruciate ligament 2 days before I was about to resign.
Wow.
So I then had to undergo quite a major knee reconstruction, and walking on treadmills, swimming in pools. And I thought my last month prior to setting off would have been very intense training. but I was busy catching up with friends, and I did very little training, and I was very unfit when I started. It's not ideal, but I realised it's not an excuse either. You can go.
All right, so how did you do it? Did you know what to expect from your journey? Tell us the first milestone, first country, first stop.
I thought I'd come up with the idea in 2004, set off 2011. And I had put in so many hours of planning and research into this journey. And I thought all of that planning and research had put me in a good place mentally to start. But I realised very quickly it's just theory. And at the start, I was overwhelmed, I felt lonely, I felt scared.
Yes.
And I was making so many mistakes. But I think all that planning and research had given me the confidence to start. But then I realised you're going to learn so much more when you're underway. And from that point on, it was such a learning curve, particularly the first few weeks of getting myself from London down to Dover, a ferry to Calais, and then through into Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and away I went.
What was the most dangerous country to cycle?
The most dangerous country to cycle, I think the traffic in places like China and Indonesia, just horrific. No regard for the safety of a cyclist on the road. And a lot of these places, they're not used to cyclists as well. So you had to be very careful of these big trucks rumbling around when they have no intention of slowing down. So you have to get out the way, give them the space they want, because they're not going to give you the space you require. Or even if you're right, being right means you're big. So the trucks have right of way. As a cyclist, you're way down the pecking order.
And what was most friendly country to cycle?
Iran.
Iran?
It was just the people in Iran, the most welcoming, open, just the kindest people I've met in my travels. Just the amount of times I was taken into homes or offered food, or just people in bakeries I would ask for 3 bits of bread. The man in the bakery would give me 6 and then just walk away without accepting money. And you're having encounters like this day after day, and it really brought home to me how warm and welcoming this country is when we don't often hear great things through mainstream media about a country such as Iran.
Okay, but I think it comes from their culture, their attitude, yes?
Absolutely. And I think being on the Silk Road, where for centuries travellers have been passing through.
Yes.
A big part of the culture is to take in those travellers, and it's almost a competition to outdo your neighbour in kindness to a stranger.
How beautiful.
It was amazing. I had people squabbling in the streets because they wanted to take me home and look after me. And this takes a lot of getting used to when you're not used to that here in the West.
How would you compare the laws here in Australia, cycling laws, to other countries, the rest of the world that you traveled on a bicycle?
Yes, well, there's rules here which are creating a safety zone between cyclists and cars. And I think it's great because at a lot of places it does get a bit tight between cyclists and cars, and it creates a safer zone for people to cycle. The more safe it is, the more people that would feel confident to use a bicycle and cycle on roads. And when I compare that to other countries where there is very little regard for a cyclist on a road, particularly some of the busy Asian countries I found. Let me think, China, Indonesia, Iran was quite dangerous as cycling. Its biggest city, Istanbul in Turkey. They don't care about you on a bike. And so to create that zone, you do feel a lot better off and you feel a lot safer when that rule or that environment is encouraged.
Of course. In 2014, you wrote and published a beautiful book, The Long Road from a Broken Heart. Tell us about the book.
Yeah, the title, a lot of people see the title and they think it's been inspired by a failed relationship.
Yes.
But it was inspired by my beautiful nephew, Jackson, who at that age was too young to explain that his uncle had undergone life-saving open heart surgery and was now cycling around the planet to raise money for these different heart charities. So like all kids, they keep it simple. And he just told everybody that I was riding around the world because I had a broken heart, and it was physically. So the book, I needed, when I finished the ride, I knew I needed another challenge pretty quickly, because otherwise there would have been this huge void in my life. And it came about in the shape of my book. And it documents my journey from being that sick child who underwent life-saving open heart surgery to somebody who then got on the bike as a healthy adult and cycled around the planet. And it touches on a lot of different aspects of the journey. What I discovered about myself as a person, people generally around the world, and what human beings can accomplish if you've got a big dream and the courage to give it a go.
And the sale of the book supports?
It supports 3 different heart charities. So I support the British Heart Foundation, Australian, and the New Zealand. And I know it was my surgeon, he received funding from the New Zealand Heart Foundation, which allowed him to undertake the research that he did many years ago. And had he not received that support, he wouldn't have been able to undertake the research. And had he not done that research, we wouldn't be having this interview.
So that was one of the reasons.
It was, I know he gave me that shot at life. That research gave me that shot. So if I can help one other person, that's why I look at it. If I can help one person, give them the chance to live a healthy life, chase their dreams, I'd be pretty happy.
Beautiful. And how did you fundraise during your trip, the actual journey? How did you collect the funds that you raised? And I think it's not just a sale of the book. Yes, your journey was to raise funds and awareness for heart foundations, yes?
Yes.
How did you raise the actual money?
So for the 3 heart foundations, I set up websites for each, where people, if they learned about my journey, they could make a donation to my page, which went to one of those 3 charities of their choice. Sometimes I would collect funds along the road.
Yes.
And I would tell people just to keep an eye on the charity they chose. And once I got to a place where I could bank it myself or make a payment through my credit card, I'd list it with their payment so they were acknowledged that their payment had gone in.
Beautiful. And you raise an overall of close to or proximity to?
So now I've raised over $50,000 for the charities, and I think I've just started. It's going to be a lifelong project for me, because I know I've had the chance to do this trip because of the surgery I had.
Yes.
And you know, what goes around, it does come around.
And how was your heart with so many hours, days, months, years of cycling?
Following the surgery, I was Sport Billy. I was playing every sport under the sun for many years. And because of that, I knew my heart was in a good place. I knew it would be physically able to cope with the stress of riding around the world. So I had no problem with the condition of my heart setting off.
But may I ask, did you ask a doctor, because before you took off, did you go to a doctor and say, by the way, I've been cycling for 2.5 years, do you think it's okay? Did you or not?
No, well, no? For the first, following the surgery,
yes,
I was going for about nearly 20 years of checkups. And every checkup, same results, same results, same results. They got bored of seeing me. And they said, look, if you think you've got a problem with your heart, let us know, but we can give you the thumbs up. He's done a great job. And through all the stress of playing sport at quite a high level, I knew I was healthy.
Beautiful. Jeremy, I read a beautiful quote in your book that I'm currently reading. And you say, I'm no longer scared of failure. To me, it is so much better to fail than to never attempt something at all. What were you most afraid of, and when?
At the start, I guess for a lot of my life, I was scared of making mistakes. I felt embarrassed if I made mistakes. And I was always coming up with excuses why I couldn't achieve something. But it was just that moment where I decided to give it a go. I thought, you're not going to achieve anything by backing out. I thought, just give it a go. And then I realised I was making mistakes day after day, particularly at the start of the journey, but I learned from them. And suddenly I found myself achieving things and doing things I hadn't done before. And that's when it clicked. I thought, these mistakes are my stepping stone to becoming a stronger, better person. So now that's when my attitude changed, and I thought, I want to keep on making mistakes because it's those mistakes which help me grow as a human being. So my mindset changed through the journey I realized it's not something to fear, it's a stepping stone.
At the beginning of your journey, knowing that you have 29 countries to cover and 52,000 kilometers, how was your schedule to do it?
At the start, mentally, I wasn't coping. Beforehand, you're planning it, it's this big adventure, it's all very exciting.
Yeah.
But the day you start, I was terrified and I did feel overwhelmed. And the first few weeks, I was not coping mentally. So I had to tell myself, forget New Zealand, don't think about it. Just get yourself to Amsterdam and make that your finish. And as I rolled into Amsterdam 10 days later, I was pumped. I was so excited at what I had just accomplished. And I said, well done, boy. And I would then allow myself to look back at what I just accomplished and think, if you can do that, you can get yourself to Prague. As I got rolled into Prague, I would think about Vienna and then Budapest. And by breaking it into much smaller sections, forget 52,000 kilometers, forget 29 countries, get yourself to the next city. And with that mindset, you can accomplish those little goals. And the more of those little goals you accomplish, your confidence starts to grow, and then you can start to look at bigger and bigger pictures once again.
And of course, it applies to life as such.
Absolutely, and that's what the journey taught me. You learn, if it feels overwhelming, don't think about the big picture. Break it down, think small goals, deal with that goal, pat yourself on the back for what you'd accomplished, then the next goal. And with that mindset, you can apply that to anything you do in life.
Incredible. Jeremy, what was the biggest revelation, highlight, incredible stories from your trip? What was the most unexpected that you, wow. I know you can't tell us all of it, but something that most memorable moments.
Okay, I think there are so many, we could spend
All right,
days.
yes.
Yeah, so if to give you one, I think a moment that changed me and the way I think was in Vietnam, where I met a man called Warren Boas, who was a teacher in an international school.
Yes.
And we were just chatting away one night, and he asked me what I was doing if I was doing anything for any charities. And I said I was doing my bit for the Australian, the New Zealand, and the British Heart Foundations. And to be honest, I wasn't doing a huge amount because I felt embarrassed telling people what I was trying to accomplish. I felt embarrassed to tell people I was riding around the world. I felt it was an ego thing to do so.
Wow.
But Warren and I were just chatting, and after asking me why I had chosen these charities, he asked me if my surgeon was Sir Brian Barrett-Boys, who was a man who saved my life.
That's in Vietnam?
In Vietnam.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, how do you know him? And he said to me, look, he operated on my brother. And my eyes lit up. I was like, you are kidding me. I said, look, how is he doing? Where does he live? I said, I don't care where he is. I felt I had to meet this man because this encounter in Vietnam, to me, that wasn't chance. It had to be fate.
Universe.
And it was fate, but not for the reasons where I thought, because Warren's head dropped at this point. He said, look, you're not going to meet my brother. He died during the operation.
Oh.
And it turned out his brother's operation, Paul's operation, it was only 2 years prior to mine. Warren and I quickly realised my surgeon, Sir Brian Barrett-Boys, would have learned so many valuable lessons from that failed operation, which he carried forward to save my life 2 years later.
Incredible.
And as I sat there, I was looking Warren in the eye. I had tears rolling down my face because that's when I realised this fundraising, it's not about me, it's not about my story.
Yes.
It's about people like Warren who had lost family members.
Yes.
And that's when I realised how selfish I had been. And suddenly I started to do so much more, because then I realised, put your ego aside, it's not about that. It's about people like Warren and so many others out there who had had heart problems. That's when it fell into place.
Jeremy, during your trip, your life was in danger, ever? Did you think, I'm going to die now, something is going to happen? I think you brushed off with mafia?
Yeah, it's not all smooth sailing on a journey
Yes,
like this.
I would imagine. Yes.
Yeah, and the worst encounter was in my favourite country, Iran, where I'd stopped at a little roadhouse in the middle of the desert to collect some water before camping that night. The three men invited me in to stay, which is very typical of Islamic hospitality. But it didn't take long before I realised this restaurant, it was a cover for their drug dealing business. And they were peddling large quantities. Having seen this, I thought I need to get out of this place as quick as I possibly can. But before I could do that, the owners came back in from the kitchen with 2 guns.
Wow.
They told me to sit down, and the man pushed one gun to me, pulled the other gun back towards himself. With a horrible grin on his face, he's smiling at me. He's just saying,
Wow.
show us how you hold the gun. And it didn't take long to work out, he was happy for me to play with the gun he had given me, but the one he had, he was keeping that very close to himself, and his arms were right over the top of it. And I worked out, my gun didn't have bullets, but it looks like his one does. And that's when I knew I couldn't go anywhere. And I knew if I panicked and took off, they would think I was going to the police. And being the death penalty in Iran for dealing drugs, they wouldn't have let me go to the police, because that probably would have been their first thought if I took off. So I realised I had to stay. And so I put my passport into one pocket, a sharp knife went in the other when they weren't looking. And I was surprised how calmly and methodically I was working through how many of those men I had to kill to see daylight. And I was prepared to do it, because they were not just going to let me walk out the door.
Wow.
But thankfully it didn't come to that, because 2 trucks arrived, 2 men in each. Unlike most people who went there to purchase drugs, these 4 men ordered food. And I knew I had 4 witnesses, and I knew they couldn't touch me.
Yes.
Grabbed my bike, wheeled it out the door, and I then rode the fastest 40 or 50 kilometres I have in my life. And inside that room, I was calm, thinking through how I need to get out of this situation. Outside that room, my head was all over the place, because you're finally thinking, I might be safe, I might be safe. And eventually I saw an ambulance station on top of a hill at about 1:30 in the morning. Banged on the door, and these men took me in. They looked after me, made sure I was okay before they finally went back to sleep themselves. And I couldn't sleep that night. I was so scared. But I knew I had to get over it, because I knew from all the blogs from other travellers I had read who had been in Iran, I knew it was one of the most welcoming countries, one of the most beautiful countries on the planet. So I had to tell myself, you have to start trusting again. Because if I didn't, I would have missed the reason for being there. And it was hard. I couldn't do it for at least a week. I couldn't trust people. But as soon as I did, I was meeting all these beautiful, warm people, which I knew did exist in Iran. And I suddenly fell back into trusting again.
Jeremy, where and when is your next trip going to be?
I will make my way to the top of Alaska and cycle to the bottom of Argentina. And I've backpacked in Africa for about 6 months, so I've seen a reasonable amount of Africa. Haven't seen as much of the Americas, and it's as simple as that. Oh, I would love to do it. I cannot wait.
Beautiful. Any time frame? When?
Once I sell my books and I've got no storage issues, and it's as simple as that.
Yes.
So once because now I've accumulated all these books, all these household possessions. I want to get back to my happy place, which is just a couple of bags on a bike. And once I can do that, I will set off for Alaska, start this again.
Beautiful. Please remind our viewers, where can they buy your book?
They can purchase it through my website's the best place to go, which is jeremyscott.com.au.
Jeremy, last question. If you had a magic wand, what would you wish for?
Yeah, I think through a journey like this, it does open your eyes to how fortunate we are living in the West. I think not just through health, education, safety. We take a lot of things for granted, and I've met so many people on this journey who have had dreams like mine. They've wanted to do amazing things in their lives, but they can't do them because they were born in one country, I was born in another. And I found that so hard to accept. When you meet people they want things more than I ever wanted my dream, but they can't do it because they were born in Vietnam or Iran, because of the visa situations, or financial, they can't do it. I want this world to treat people as human beings, treat us all as equals, and I want everyone to have the same opportunities in life, because I think that is something that doesn't exist at the moment, and that touched me on this journey, how I felt embarrassed how lucky I was, and I want other people to have the same opportunity I have in life.
Beautiful. That's your wish come true. Thanks, Jeremy. See you on the next trip.
It'd be a pleasure.